This is the European History Lecture for 22 European History. And I have work to return, which I'm going to delegate if people want to. Okay, good. There we go. So, I don't have details because I didn't watch the news over the weekend, but it does seem that Mr. Putin has sent troops into eastern Ukraine. I don't know about more than that, and that has triggered sanctions. Even the spineless Germans have stepped up and called into question the new Nord pipeline that bypasses Ukraine and goes into Germany. Putin is not happy about that. I don't think it's a full-scale invasion, but if you live in the eastern Ukraine, it doesn't really matter. If anyone has more information, I am happy to entertain it. Does anyone have more information?
I so wish I did. Can I make stuff up? Does that count?
No, we have a media that does that already.
Oh.
Yes.
I know Putin declared two eastern Ukraine regions independent from Ukraine or something.
Yes, and then he sent in peacekeeping troops.
Peacekeepers.
Yeah.
He's doing a very deliberate.
What a guy.
What a
Look,
guy.
remember, when we studied World War II, Polish soldiers, concentration camp victims dressed in Polish uniforms, attacked an innocent German radio station that caused World War II. So, yeah, of course, Putin's just defending Russia against those evil Ukrainians.
The independence, because the people living in those areas are widely Russian speaking and
The eastern Ukraine has had massive Russian settlement over the years, yes. And that's the pretext. It's still the violation, in my judgment, of a sovereign nation's borders, just as what happened in the Crimea 10 years ago or more was a violation. But yes, and this, by the way, is why so many people elsewhere in the former Soviet Union are concerned by the Russian minorities that live in their lands, because those Russian minorities may very well have loyalty not to their own countries, but to Mother Russia. It's always been a concern. It is also, by the way, one of the reasons why the Chinese Communist Party has been moving huge numbers of Han Chinese into Xinjiang and Tibet and Hong Kong to displace or outnumber the local population. Yes?
So these peacekeepers happen to have P-72s,
Yeah.
SU-25s, and NIS.
Yeah. The peacekeepers are as well armed as the most elite units in the Russian military. In fact, I think they are the most elite units in the Russian military. And there's a reason for that. Russia's army, for all of its power, has never been, as a rule, the most well-disciplined or well-organized military in the world. They have good elite units, though, and that's the ones they use.
I'm not convinced the level. There are guys who are nothing compared to really anybody else, because it's just a whole bunch of guys that don't want to be there.
Yeah.
I'm not saying our military isn't like that, but it's just a whole bunch of guys that don't want to be there.
Our military should be better than that, because it's an all-volunteer force. But then again, our military is the wokest of woke militaries, thanks to Obama and Biden.
All those flag officers are the woke.
I know. Don't even get me started. Don't get me started. Chelsea Manning. Nonsense. Anyway, okay, now that we've babbled for the first few minutes of class, which are the most important minutes of class, you are getting back your work thanks to 3 nice delivery ladies. And anyone who is not here can, you can just, I think everyone's here though, so that's not an issue. Okay, we are focusing in now on Locke.
So
Barbara Tuchman was one of the great historians of the mid-20th century. She wrote a book that we're going to be using when we talk a little bit about the early part of World War I called The Guns of August. Great popular historian. And she wrote a book about the period in the late 1800s and early 1900s before World War I entitled The Proud Tower. This is a reference to the Tower of Babel in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, which was a proud tower built by human beings who thought that they could build a tower tall enough to look God in the face. There was a pride, even a hubris, in European Christian Western civilization in the very late 1800s and early 1900s. Why? Well, the West was the only industrialized society in the world, more advanced than everyone else. The West was the part of the world that had the greatest population growth. Yes, Asia, in its pre-industrial benightedness, had larger populations than Europe, but their growth levels and their life expectancy and their infant mortality rates were much worse than Europe's, because Europe had modern medicine. While the rest of the world used dugout canoes or wooden sailing ships, the Europeans began building steel dreadnought battleships with guns that could shoot a bullet the size of a Volkswagen across the horizon with accuracy. There was no place in the world like Europe. Europe had factories, cities, steel mills, and European Christian Western civilization was developing new wonders like the telegraph, the radio, or wireless telegraphy. And ultimately, submarines, torpedoes, aircraft. Christian Western civilization was the high, at its high point relative to the rest of the planet. Now, you've read Greek epic poems. You know where hubris leads. So this is the beautiful, proud tower, thank you, before its fall in the First World War, which is the most consequential event in modern history. Now, we've talked about Darwin's ideas, so I'm not going to rehash those. I will take you on to Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche is a philosopher, Nietzsche. I think I misspelled it up here. Did I? I think there's an S somewhere in there. Anyway, he's got the most difficult to write last name, Nietzsche. Nietzsche. If somebody back there with a book wants to look up Nietzsche's last name and give me the proper spelling, I would appreciate it. You can use our history books. They have that too. Oh, you can use the encyclopedias. Okay, Nietzsche starts out a devotee of Richard Wagner, of the opera writer who ends up doing the Ring Cycle and the Meistersingers von Nuremberg and Parsifal and Tristan and Isolde and these other great German operas. Nietzsche starts out a romantic. But then he serves as a medic in the Franco-Prussian War. And the thing about being a medic in wartime is you see things that you can never forget. You don't see the bright cavalry charge with its flashing sabers and its brave young men. You see the broken and torn up bodies that are the aftermath on both sides. Yes?
Nietzsche.
S-C-H-E. Thank you.
Yep.
So Nietzsche changes as a result of his experiences as an army medic. No longer the romantic, but still with passion. Nietzsche ends up developing a philosophy which is very apropos to the modern world. I don't necessarily recommend it, but I do recommend learning about it, studying it. It's often maligned because it's not left-wing. It's not Marxian at all. It's also not Christian. Nietzsche's most famous quote is, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." In what way is this true? In what way is this false? That which does not kill us makes us stronger. That's a question. I hope for and expect answers. How is that which does not kill us makes us stronger true? How is it false? Haley.
Well, it's also something like in the military, your military sometimes gets weaker as people it gets diminished. And maybe it doesn't kill your entire military off, but it still kills off most of the people.
Okay, there's weakness. But on the other hand, in the military, you have training. And the most elite units receive the most deadly training, difficult training, live fire training that people get injured and killed in. Why would you do that to your own people, to volunteers? You do that because if they survive the training, and you're not trying to kill them, you just have training that's close to battlefield, which means it's going to be dangerous. And some people are going to do stupid things in dangerous situations, and they will get hurt or killed. In elite units in the military, that's worth it, because you come out on the other side with a finely honed warrior, which they weren't at first. Portia, you know.
I think that phrase is true in the sense that if something is so severe, maybe it doesn't actually necessarily have to be severe, but you have to overcome something. So if it doesn't kill you, you have to overcome it, and therefore, theoretically, you are stronger, you become better. One could disagree with this, saying that, let's say you have an injury that is, let's say you become paralyzed or something, you may become mentally stronger, but physically, you may not be.
Indeed. Because
I've seen examples of that happen with people, so it can kind of go both ways depending on what scenario you're talking about.
Indeed. Well said.
So sort of what Portia said, you persevere and learn. So after a hard thing comes, you think it's going to kill you, but it doesn't. You learn, you get stronger, you survive. Even with mental illnesses, you might really get kind of close to trying to die, or kind of having some hard things in life. You learn through them, you try to kind of go through them, and you get help, and then you become stronger.
In fact, when you fight diseases, your system develops antibodies that make you resistant to that disease in the future. Yeah. Yes, Jane.
So the experiences that a person might be experience in situations that they're in danger, if an individual becomes traumatized from that experience, their mentality can go down, and that does not make you stronger, versus this one who is able to just become immune to the reaction they have, because they're kind of like two sides of people that you see after they've been through something really traumatic. They either ignore everything that bugs them, or they are so overly sensitive to it that they just have a reaction every time that's way over the top than what it should be.
Because their mentality has been strained to the breaking point, maybe it's broken.
I think my first thought was counterexamples, and the first thing I thought of was age. And age, it doesn't make you stronger, but it makes you mentally stronger. It makes
until senility or something like that. Yeah.
And I guess the other thing is it's kind of a mindset that you have to adopt. It's not something that is true for everything. If you can convince yourself that is true, then it's going to help you. But it's something you have to convince yourself of.
Indeed, and very well said. It is not a universal truth. There are things that won't kill you that will make you weaker. Getting Lyme disease, for example, you don't die from it, but you get weaker. But Sam is right on target when he talks about it being an attitude. And Nietzsche is recommending that attitude. It's an attitude of courage towards life. It's an attitude of bravery, almost reckless bravery. A sense that you should not be afraid and let fear dictate your choices to you. You should be bold, because only by being bold will you overcome the limits of your beginning. Nietzsche believed in the development of human beings through willpower, and their ability to transcend their origins and become something truly special through their willpower.
With the phrase, what doesn't make you stronger? I think that part of it, though, is you have to not let it kill you. If you want to take, that military training, for example, those guys that failed got killed. Maybe not actually, but mentally and physically, they died. But those guys that finished are stronger because they didn't let them die. They just said, screw this, I'm going to keep going.
Yes. And that's really... There are certain ordeals where you encounter your genuine self, and those SEAL training, for example, is one such because you won't pass it unless you are willing to endure anything.
Yeah, you're not going to pass it unless you want. Like,
Yeah.
Like a lot of people,
Not because you want the uniform or the symbol or the chicks, but because you want to be a Navy SEAL.
Yeah, because a lot of people go into that thinking, oh, I saw the movies, I read the books, it's going to be cool. Not realizing that when you go through this, like, the body can do anything that the mind tells it to, but you have to want it more than literally anything else to be able to get through that.
Yes. You also have to prepare your body.
Yeah, it's a big part. But, like, you have to want it more than anything, because to let it not kill you, you have to say, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do. There's nothing in the world that's going to stop me from getting there. And those are the guys that pass. The guys that fail, they wanted something else, and it wasn't passing that training.
Indeed. One of the nicest, most wonderful young men I had when I was a young teacher wanted to be a soldier more than anything else. And he washed out during basic training. And it took him close to a decade to recover from that and build a new life. There people are not injured, sometimes do come back different. Nietzsche wrote about what was called the triumph of the will. Now, Hitler appropriates a number of these Nietzschean sayings and Nietzschean philosophies, but Nietzsche died long before Hitler became anything other than a failed artist in Vienna. We all start out in the circumstances of our birth and childhood, and that's an everyday human being. But if you are bold, if you are ambitious, if you are strong of will, you can do to your life what a bodybuilder does to their muscles. That isn't the image Nietzsche uses, but it's an image that's very visual and it should be understandable. You can craft of your mind a tool or a weapon for the achievement of goals. You can, through willpower, overcome your weakness, not be a slave to it anymore. If you allow your weakness to define you, then you are a slave to your vice or to your dark side or to your fears. But if you confront those fears, if you grab them, if you wrestle them, I did this once. I have done it several times. I had just graduated from high school. I was getting ready to go to a good college. I was on top of the world, and I've always been afraid of heights. Near my home was Sleeping Giant State Park. Sleeping Giant Mountain was a feature that from a distance looks like a giant laying down. It's off of the hanging hills in central Connecticut. And so I went there by myself. I, new to my driver's license, so I was enjoying driving around. And I parked. Nobody knew where I was. I just was out. And I went to the top of the mountain, and there's a cliff about 200 feet, 250 feet. And I free climbed it down because I didn't want to be afraid. I didn't want to let fear define me. And I was proud of that. I was. It helped me face other things. But man, I was a stupid idiot. Because if I had fallen, nobody would have known. Nobody would have known where to look for the body. And it might not have been found for months. I mean, that park, it might not have been found for years. I might have just been declared missing. They would have found my car there, so they would have known where to search. But who would think that some idiot would free climb down a 200 foot, 250 foot cliff without telling anyone where he is?
Well, and they would think that you jumped too.
Well, it depends. They could probably tell if they were interested forensically that I fell from 50 feet rather than 200 feet, and there may be evidence of my climb. So the Nietzschean idea of facing your fears really captured me when I was a little older than you. And there's truth in it. And the truth is that life should be led boldly, or you'll never achieve your dreams. Understand this. Somewhere inside each one of you are some really wonderful dreams of a future. And life will try to wear that down, wear that away. Instead of being something great, you might be something normal. And that might be a wonderful destiny. You might be a wife, or mother, a father. You might do your job. Your job may be nothing special, but you're a wonderful dad or you're a wonderful mom. Wonderful American, or whatever. That's all fine. if you, in the end, decide that that's what you really want. But if you want to travel more than anything else, or if you want to write a book more than anything else, or if you want to teach more than anything else, you owe it to yourself to pursue that dream with seriousness at some point in your life. Because if you don't, who will? If you don't believe in your own dreams, no one else will. Not really. So Nietzsche's idea that willpower can be a key to open up unexpected opportunities and a future filled with vistas of scope and possibility, he's right about that. That which does not kill us makes us stronger. What he believed in what was called the Übermensch, the Superman. And a Nietzschean Superman is somebody who has redefined himself by willpower alone. Not to be a natural human being, but to be an overman, a superman, a superior individual, an individual worthy of command, an individual worthy of leadership. And that a person like that, unconstrained by conventional morality, can do anything. Can live like a demigod among men, like Hercules among the ancient Greeks. Most people don't have the will for it, or the guts for it. Because when you do something like that, you take your life in your hands. And when you fail, if you fail, it's pretty tough to deal with. But I will say this. If you try to pursue a great dream and fail, there'll be less regret in the long run, probably, than if you're too afraid to ever really try. Fear keeps people slavish. Fear of failure. Fear of the unknown, fear of success. Be bold. Now, Nietzsche, in his works, has another famous saying: "Gott ist tot." Gott ist tot. If you have any notion of German, God is dead. Nietzsche became anti-Christian. He was also anti-Semite, but he became anti-Christian. Nietzsche blamed Christianity for taking the steel out of European backbone, for taking the bold manliness out of European civilization. He saw Christianity as a religion of slaves, a religion of meekness, of compassion, of forgiveness, of toleration, a religion of love. Nietzsche saw in all of those things nothing but the excuse of failures. And so you have a person with all the potential in the world to become a Superman. If they're willful, if they're strong, if they are brave. But Christianity turns them into a mewling milquetoast. Milquetoast is an old-fashioned expression for a man who has no vigor, no drive, no strength of purpose, no vitality, no gusto, no macho. So Nietzsche argues that in a world without gods, the only gods are the Supermen. But how many people choose to be Supermen when surrounded by a conventional morality that steals from them all of the things that are going to make them supreme? So, does anyone else have anything to add about Nietzsche, if you happen to know, or if you have any questions? Yeah.
Did he start off as Christian? Probably when he was raised.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, in fact. He became a romantic. And romantic doesn't necessarily contradict Christianity, although he became enamored of Wagner's pagan German gods. I think that the experiences in the war stripped him of a lot of his faith and made him think in terms of raw power. The power of will, the power of force, the power to dominate. But most of all, and this is where a lot of people get Nietzsche wrong, including Hitler, They assume that Nietzsche talks about strong-willed people dominating the weak. Maybe that's a secondary thing. What Nietzsche was really talking about was strong-willed people dominating themselves. The mind over matter thing that can, as he was talking about, make a person pass through the most terrible of ordeals because they really want to. That's what Nietzsche primarily focused on. But Nietzsche writes in such stark terms it's easy to distort his words and turn him into a caricature. I will also say this. Nietzsche spent most of his last years locked away in an insane asylum. So Nietzsche's ideas have some danger to them. Okay. This plus Darwin and the social Darwinism that's taken up should indicate something to you. The Christian concept of Western civilization is being stepped away from, not by the people. People in European countries and the United States and Australia and New Zealand and South Africa, other civilized places, Argentina, Chile, the people were still overwhelmingly Christian. But the leadership was developing this pseudo-Machiavellian, pseudo-Nietzschean sophistication, which made them less interested in morality and more interested in expediency. They wanted power because they saw the struggle between nations in Darwinian terms. Instead of seeing the people on the other side of the border as fellow children of God, for whom Christ died, they're another species, wanting to take our land, our women, our food, and we have to fight them to annihilation. Social Darwinism, which sees Germans as distinct species from Poles, as distinct species from Hungarians, as distinct species from Lithuanians, as distinct species from Russians, destroys empathy between those groups, destroys an interest in relating. Why would you relate to a mortal enemy? Why would you relate to another species? Tolkien writes from some of these bases, but Tolkien is a deeply Catholic man, Roman Catholic Christian, and in England at that time that wasn't easy. But to speak to the people of his time, what does Tolkien do? He separates human nature out. The dwarves are craftsmen. They're the desire in us to work with our hands. The elves are our noblest selves, spiritual, nature-loving. What are the orcs? The orcs are our fury personified. The orcs and the trolls and the other monsters. They started out as people, and they became something else. When Tolkien was fighting in the trenches in World War I, people had stopped thinking of the Germans as people. In effect, they were orcs. I know. This may not seem gripping. I understand. But there's a reason why I've been focusing so much on Christianity from the middle of last year. Because European civilization is defined by it. But this late 19th century marriage of Nietzschean worship of power and willpower and Darwin's notion of a godless universe where species are in an existential competition, what that leads to, ladies and gentlemen, are the death camps. It is a philosophically straight line. When you take Christianity out of Western civilization, when you take Judeo-Christian notions that every human being has value and purpose, you unleash the unspeakable savagery that exists inside of people. In other words, as Europeans were developing a technical prowess never before achieved in human history, the leadership of Western civilization were seeing fellow human beings as other, not with sympathy, but with antipathy. Spiritually, Europe was regressing back to an age of tribal savagery And the expression of this, again, is the First World War and what comes out of it, which is everything in post-World War I history. I am not saying that Christianity is without sin. I am not saying that up until this point, European civilization has been perfect. It should be obvious, I don't think it has. But up until this point, the leadership has been constrained by Christian notions. And when it hasn't, that leadership, like Robespierre, has been overthrown. But in the late 19th century, a combination of Nietzscheanism, of Darwinism, and of other pragmatic ideas create a new mentality among the ruling classes of Europe that make it less likely that Europeans will continue to function as Christendom, and more likely that they will engage in a fratricide without end. Thoughts, questions, comments, objections? If not, we'll move in. Obviously, I think this is important, but it's up to you whether you see what I'm talking about or whether you think I'm wrong. Yeah.
Are you just applying this to the Western world or then also the Eastern world? Because,
well, you're going to see that the Eastern world, in terms of Japan, becomes Western, but they don't become Western. They become Western of the age of imperialism. The Chinese Communist Party harkens back to that too. In other words, the East and the South, the world that's about to be conquered by Europe, when they encounter European civilization, it is not Christendom exactly. It is the civilization that worships power. And so what Japan gets is might makes right. What the Chinese Communist Party gets is might makes right. The strong will rule the weak. The will to power is not the will to control yourself. It's the will to dominate everyone else. So this infects the rest of the world. The rest of the world thinks that the lesson to being European is being ruthless. I don't think that's the lesson to being European. I don't think that's the lesson to being Western. But in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, it becomes the dominant ethos. Again, not among the people, but among the rulers. Does that make sense? Thank you for asking. Okay. So, what will naturally be produced from this, in this context, is the age of empires. Now, self-flagellating historians of the modern age, oh, the West is so bad. Oh, dead European white men destroyed all the native loveliness. Beat up the West as if Western civilization in the late 1800s was the only culture on earth to conquer. Which, no. Everyone who is strong has a period of imperialism. So it was with Akkad, the second civilization on the planet. So it is in China. So it is in India. So it is in Europe. So it is in the Middle East. So it is among the Aztecs and the Incas. So it is among human beings. When you are young and vigorous, you conquer. This is true in Africa. It's true of the American Indians. It's true in Asia. This notion that Columbus conquered paradise is willfully blind to the reality of Native American societies that actually existed. There is a fashionable willingness on the part of left-wing academics to blame the West for everything. So, Zimbabwe has a failed economy. In Zimbabwe, you have one tribe almost try to wipe out the other tribe. The Shona try to wipe out the Ndebele. But it's all Britain's fault, because Britain came in the 1890s and left in 1980. All of Uganda's problem. It's all Britain's fault. Even China. It's all Britain's fault, and the fault of the other Europeans. This is akin to critical race theory. It's akin to every allied theory that says We know who's good and bad based on the amount of melanin in their skin. White people, bad. Brown people, red people, black people, yellow people, good. But white people, bad. European imperialism of the late 18 and early 1900s is different from all others. I will explain how. But its difference is one of scope and of technical prowess. In other words, Europe's the first society that conquers the entire world. And that happened before World War I. And Europe is the first society to do it with industrial age Wests. Bless you. That's different. But the desire for power, the desire to make the map more and more and more your color, Genghis Khan well understood that motive. Julius Caesar, Attila the Hun, Sargon of Akkad, Ashoka in India, Ashurbanipal. Trying to think of the Inca emperor's name. The Inca great king, the Inca, the one who Pizarro captures. Atahualpa, yeah. Montezuma in the Aztecs. They all understood this. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin understand this today. They want to expand their power. They were willing to use force to do it. So, we will study the European age of empires. But this prejudice, and frankly, it is a rank prejudice that says that somehow qualitatively the Europeans are more evil than any other empire in human history, is just an expression, as far as I'm concerned, of the white guilt of those professors who promulgate this theory. In other words, love me, love me, love me, I'm a liberal. It's not me who did this, it's other people. That is not history. That's group therapy. European civilization, when it engages in empire building, is doing something that literally every other society that reached a certain type of strength has always done, without exception. Don't believe me. Look into it yourself. See what was done. There were horrors and there were joys. Okay. In your notes, please flip ahead to this page. And you will see on this page a map of the British Empire at its height. This page. It even says the British Empire in 1914. Actually, the empire gets bigger after 1914 when Britain takes over a number of German colonies. But relatively, it's not as powerful ever again as it was just before the First World War. Now, there's a famous saying, the sun never sets on the British Empire. Look at the map. That's not mere hyperbole. That's literally true. Okay, let's look at the British Isles, which are top, slightly left of center on your map. You can see London, and the British Isles are circled off the northwest coast of Europe. Let's go west. There's Canada, who once was very free. And in the Caribbean, you've got British Honduras, which we call Belize today. You've got Jamaica. You've got a number of islands in the West Indies. You've got British Guiana in South America. You've got the Falkland Islands, South Georgia, South Shetland Islands, South Orkney Islands, all off the coast of South America. You've got St. Helena, which is also British, and Ascension Islands in the Central Atlantic, South Atlantic. And that's just on the left side of the map. Now we go to the extreme right side of the map, Southern Hemisphere. You've got Fiji, which was British, New Zealand, Australia, and Tasmania. North, you've got Hong Kong. The British had bases at Shanghai, at Weihai, at Tencent. The British also control North Borneo and Singapore and Malaya. Actually, don't list Malaya here. The British control Burma and British India, which includes India, Pakistan, Bhutan, Sikkim, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. That's all British, and the Maldives. The British control Mauritius off Madagascar. They control South Africa, Bechuanaland, Rhodesia. They control Kenya, Uganda, Burundi and Rwanda, the Sudan, Egypt. The British control Nigeria, the Gold Coast, which we call Ghana today, Sierra Leone, the Gambia, Gibraltar, Malta, Cyprus, all in the Mediterranean. So, the British Empire faces all directions. Literally, it was true. Somewhere in the world, the sun was shining on a Union Jack over British territory. Now, this empire is unlike all of the pre-industrial empires. Pre-industrial empires, Alexander's empire, the Persian Empire, Alexander's empire, the Roman Empire, the Islamic Empire, the Mongol Empire, even Napoleon's empire, the Russian Empire, they're all land empires. They expand by army control of expanding territory. That means that the empires expand contiguously. In other words, like an amoeba, what? They grow. Why is it that I'm having trouble with time today? Oh well. I hope you had a good weekend. Have a happy and wondrous day. We'll continue.
You're a little early. 11:30. I thought we got at 35. That's what it always says on the clock.
Do we always get out at 35?
We get out at 11:30, yes, we do. I apparently just went on and on. You had your quiz too. Bye.